She grew up in a village where silence was a heavy cloak, draped over her like a shadow that never lifted. Her name was Adana, but most did not speak it often, if at all. After her mother's hanging, the villagers saw her as more than just a girl. She was the living echo of a dark past, a walking reminder of shame and sorrow. Her days unfolded in quiet corners, where her soft footsteps barely stirred the dust beneath ancient trees, and her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. From dawn until dusk, she moved like a ghost through the narrow paths of her village, avoiding the sharp glances and whispered curses that followed her every step. Her mother had been a woman of fierce spirit and unmatched kindness, known for her gentle hands that healed wounds and her voice that sang lullabies under the silver light of the moon. But fate had turned cruel. A false accusation of witchcraft had torn through the village like a wildfire, fueled by fear and jealousy. One fateful morning, the village gathered in the square where the tall baobab tree stood, a silent witness to countless generations. The rope that would take her mother's life hung from a sturdy branch, swaying lightly in the wind as if mocking the injustice about to unfold. The execution had been swift but brutal. The crowd watched with stony faces as the rope tightened, as her mother's body swung gently, her last breath caught in the air between earth and sky. Many whispered that her mother's spirit cursed the village even in death, a curse that had somehow clung to Adana like a second skin. The rope itself, stained and worn with age, was left hanging in the town square, a grim reminder and warning to all who dared stray from the rules set by the elders. From that day, Adana's life was marked by the rope's shadow. Villagers crossed the street to avoid her, and children who once played with her ran away when she approached. Women muttered behind tightly pressed hands, calling her the daughter of silence, as if her mother's death had sealed her lips forever. The village's well-worn paths felt narrower, suffocating under the weight of suspicion and fear. Despite it all, Adana found solace in the small, quiet things others overlooked. She tended to a small garden behind her hut, nurturing herbs and wildflowers that grew stubbornly among the rocks. She cared for a few chickens and a lone goat, their gentle bleats and clucks the only sounds that filled the emptiness around her. Her hands, calloused but gentle, often brushed the petals of the flowers as if drawing strength from their fragile beauty. Every evening, she sat beneath the same baobab tree where the rope still hung, tracing the patterns in its bark and imagining the stories it could tell, stories of joy, of sorrow, of justice, and of hope. Adana's heart ached with loneliness, but it also held a quiet strength. She learned to read the signs in the sky, the language of the birds, and the subtle shifts of the wind. She listened to the whispers of the earth beneath her feet, secrets that no one else seemed to hear. The villagers might have seen her as cursed, but in her silence, a different story was unfolding, one of resilience, patience, and a spark of something that would not be easily broken. The rope remained a fixture in the village square, weathered and frayed, but never taken down. At night, its shadow stretched long across the ground, as if reaching out to pull the living and the dead into the same story. Sometimes Adana wondered if the rope held more than just the memory of her mother's death. Perhaps it held the power to speak truths that words could not, waiting for the right moment to unravel the silence that bound her. In the hushed moments before dawn, when the village still slept and the first light touched the earth, Adana would walk past the rope. Her fingers brushed lightly against the rough fibers, cold and worn from years of exposure. It was the only connection she had left to her mother, and though it was a symbol of pain, it was also a silent promise. A promise that one day the story would be told, not as a tale of shame, but as a testament to the strength that grew in the quietest hearts. The villagers went about their daily lives, bound by old fears and old rules, unaware that beneath their feet, beneath their judgments, something was stirring. The daughter of silence was listening, learning, and waiting. And though they tried to break her with their scorn and avoidance, they could not break the bond between a mother and her child, nor the quiet fire that burned within Adana's soul. Her life was a soft murmur against the harsh clamor of the village's judgment, a whisper of hope in a place that had forgotten how to listen. And as the rope swayed gently in the breeze above the square, it waited for the day when the silence would finally be shattered, and the truth carried on the wind would reach every ear, no matter how hard they tried to shut it out. The moment her stepfather took the rope down from the weathered branch of the baobab tree, Adana's heart sank like a stone thrown into a deep well. The rope was old and frayed, its fibers stiffened by years of sun, rain, and wind. It carried with it the weight of a terrible history, a history that was now destined to mark her own flesh. For the villagers, it was a tool of justice, a symbol of power. For Adana, it was a relic of pain, a rope soaked not only in her mother's blood but in the fears and grudges that had haunted the village for generations. The first time they used it on her was on a dry afternoon when the air hung heavy with heat and silence. Adana had spoken out, softly but firmly, against a harsh decree issued by the village elders. They wanted her to stay silent, to accept the punishment without question. But the courage inside her refused to be smothered. Her stepfather, a stern man with eyes like cold stone, dragged her to the clearing beneath the baobab tree. Without a word, he wrapped the old rope around his calloused hand, the fibers coarse against his skin. The crowd watched in silence as if waiting for the rope to speak. When the first lash landed on her back, pain exploded through her body like fire. The rough strands tore at her skin, leaving a sting that burned deeper than any wound she had ever known. But it was not just physical pain that gripped her, it was something far more mysterious. As the rope fell again and again, a strange tingling sensation began to crawl beneath her skin, deep into her bones. It was subtle at first, a faint buzzing that she tried to ignore. But as the blows continued, the tingling grew stronger, more insistent. It was as if the rope carried a voice, soft, distant, whispering secrets only she could hear. The villagers stood around her, some with grim faces, others with expressions twisted by fear or curiosity. The elders nodded approvingly at her punishment, believing that this would break her spirit, silence the daughter of the woman who had been branded a witch. But instead of breaking her, the rope seemed to awaken something ancient within her, a connection to the past that pulsed through her very veins. As the punishment ended and she collapsed to the dusty ground, her back raw and bleeding, the whispers grew louder in her mind. They spoke in a language she did not fully understand, weaving words like threads of a tapestry that stretched across time. They spoke of justice, of vengeance, of voices silenced but never forgotten. The pain in her back was no longer just a wound, it was a doorway. Over the following days, Adana found herself drawn to the rope. Despite its cruel purpose, it held a strange power over her. When she touched the fibers, she could feel the echoes of her mother's final moments, the sorrow and strength interwoven in every strand. The rope became a silent companion, a source of both torment and revelation. Her stepfather noticed the change in her. He saw how she flinched when the rope was mentioned, but also how her eyes glimmered with something he could not understand. His control over her began to falter as the whispers in her back grew bolder, guiding her thoughts and actions in ways he could neither predict nor suppress. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adana sat beneath the baobab tree, the rope coiled beside her. The whispers filled her mind with visions, flickering images of her mother's face, the faces of other women who had suffered in silence, and the village itself, caught in a cycle of fear and oppression. The rope seemed to pulse with life, its fibers glowing faintly in the twilight. She realized then that the rope was more than a tool of punishment, it was a vessel of memory, a thread connecting her to those who had been wronged before her. The whispers were not curses but calls for justice, urging her to listen, to remember, to speak the truths buried beneath the village's surface. But the path ahead was perilous. The elders, sensing the shift in her spirit, tightened their grip, using the rope again and again in attempts to silence the growing power within her. Each lash was meant to erase the whispers, but instead they grew stronger, weaving themselves into her flesh, transforming her pain into a voice that could no longer be ignored. As the seasons changed, so did Adana. The girl who once moved silently through the village now carried the weight of countless stories on her back. The rope's whispers became a chorus of the past and the present, guiding her toward a destiny that would challenge the very foundations of the village's power. Through every lash, every sting and every whisper, Adana's resolve hardened. The rope that was meant to break her became the instrument of her awakening. In the quiet moments between punishment, she learned to listen, to the whispers, to the wind, to the beating of her own heart. And in that listening she found strength beyond the reach of fear. Her stepfather's shadow loomed large, but it could not touch the fire that now burned within her. The rope had returned, but it was no longer a symbol of her suffering alone. It was the beginning of a voice that would speak truth to power, a voice that would not be silenced no matter how many times the rope fell. The rope's cruel lashes left more than just red welts on Adana's back. They carved a secret language into her flesh, a hidden dialogue only she could hear. At first, the sounds were faint, like distant murmurs carried on the wind, barely more than echoes in the depths of her pain. But as the punishment continued, the whispers grew stronger, weaving through her consciousness with a steady rhythm that no one else could perceive. Each night, when the village lay cloaked in silence and darkness, the voices came alive. The cool shadows of her small hut transformed into a sacred space, where the ancient spirits spoke through the wounds on her skin. They whispered in riddles, their tones haunting and melodic, as if carrying the secrets of forgotten times and forgotten people. Adana would lie awake, feeling the tingling heat beneath her torn skin, and listen with all her heart, desperate to understand the cryptic messages. The voices spoke in languages she did not recognize, ancient tongues filled with strange syllables and rhythms that stirred something deep within her soul. Sometimes the whispers were gentle prayers, other times fierce warnings. They told stories of bravery, betrayal, and redemption, of women who had faced cruelty and risen stronger. It was as if the rope had bound her not only to her mother's fate but to a lineage of resilience that stretched across generations. At first, Adana believed the whispers were a curse, a cruel torment meant to break her spirit. She tried to drown them out with tears, with frantic prayers to gods she barely understood, but the voices persisted. They refused to be silenced, filling her nights with their enigmatic presence. Gradually, the fear turned to curiosity. She began to welcome the whispers, feeling their strange comfort in the cold darkness. The whispers guided her thoughts and dreams, revealing hidden truths about her family and the village. They spoke of the rope's origin, how it had once been a tool not just of punishment but of justice, wielded by ancestors who sought balance in a world ruled by cruelty. But over time, its meaning had twisted, becoming a symbol of oppression. The voices urged Adana to remember the original purpose, to reclaim the power buried beneath the pain. As days passed, the whispers grew clearer, and Adana started to understand fragments of their meaning. They spoke of a sacred bond between her and the land, of a destiny intertwined with the cows that roamed the fields and the ancient trees that whispered in the wind. The voices hinted at powers she had yet to awaken, gifts that would turn the rope's sting into a source of strength. But the path was not easy. The pain from the lashes was raw and unrelenting, a constant reminder of the cruelty she endured. Each scar was a testament to suffering, yet also a mark of survival. Adana's body bore the stories of her ancestors, etched in flesh and blood, while her mind unraveled the riddles that the whispers wove into the night. Sometimes the voices spoke in warnings, urging her to be cautious of those who sought to keep her silent. They revealed the fear lurking in the eyes of her stepfather and the elders, the desperation to control a power they could not comprehend. The whispers urged her to be patient, to gather strength, and to trust the slow unfolding of her destiny. On some nights, the whispers became a fierce chorus, urging her to rise, to speak, to break the chains that bound her and others like her. They spoke of justice not as revenge but as healing, a renewal that would wash away the pain and restore balance to the village. Adana felt the weight of this mission settle on her shoulders, a sacred responsibility carried through the ages. Despite the isolation that came with her unique burden, the whispers became her companions, her guides through the darkness. They reminded her that she was never truly alone, that the voices of her mother, her ancestors, and countless others traveled through time to stand with her. Their strength seeped into her bones, weaving courage into every breath. Her stepfather's punishments became less terrifying in the face of this growing inner power. The rope's sting was still sharp, but the whispers transformed the pain into a song of survival. With every lash, the voices grew louder, more insistent, until Adana could no longer ignore the call. One night, as the moon cast a silver glow over the village, the whispers formed a clear message. She was the bearer of a forgotten legacy, the one chosen to reclaim the truth hidden beneath centuries of silence. The rope was no longer a symbol of shame but a sacred thread connecting her to a destiny greater than herself. In the quiet moments before dawn, Adana rose from her straw mat with a new resolve. The scars on her back ached, but they also pulsed with life, a living map of the journey she was about to undertake. The whispers faded into a soft lullaby, promising guidance and protection as she stepped into the uncertain light of a new day. Her back may have been marked by cruelty, but it was also the canvas of a powerful story, a story whispered through the wounds, waiting to be told. And Adana, the daughter of silence, was ready to listen. The night was thick with a heavy silence, the kind that presses deep into the bones and makes the air feel almost alive with unseen tension. Adana lay on her thin straw mat, the faint ache of her scars reminding her of the day's harsh punishments, but exhaustion tugged at her eyelids. Just as sleep began to pull her under, a soft glow emerged from the corner of the dim hut, a light that shimmered like moonbeams dancing on water. Slowly, the shape of a woman took form in the shadows. She was ethereal, translucent, yet her presence was undeniable. Adana's heart caught in her throat as the woman stepped closer, her mother. Not a ghost of terror but a gentle, radiant guide. The pain in Adana's back seemed to momentarily lessen, replaced by a strange warmth that spread like wildfire through her chest. Her mother's eyes held no anger or sorrow but a profound understanding, as if she carried the wisdom of ages and the weight of unspoken truths. She spoke softly, her voice like the rustling of leaves in a sacred forest, calming yet powerful. "My child," she said, "the rope that binds you is not just a tool of punishment. It is a vessel of injustice, woven with the pain of many who came before us. It was never meant to silence you but to awaken something deeper, something that can no longer be ignored." Adana listened, breathless, as her mother's spirit continued. She revealed that long ago the rope was crafted not for cruelty, but as a symbol of law and balance, designed to hold wrongdoers accountable. Over time, however, the village's leaders twisted its meaning, using it to control and suppress, to instill fear rather than justice. "The same rope that took my life now touches yours," her mother whispered, "but it is transforming. Your wounds are becoming a voice for the silenced, a language that speaks beyond pain and fear. You carry the legacy of those who suffered, but also the promise of change." As her mother's ghost hovered near, Adana felt a connection that transcended time, a bridge between past and future. The cold sting of the rope's lash had become something sacred, a conduit for messages that could awaken the village's conscience. "You are not alone," her mother assured her. "Through you the voices of the forgotten will rise. Your scars will whisper truths that no one dares to hear, and your spirit will lead the way toward healing." Adana reached out instinctively, wanting to touch the apparition, but her hand passed through the luminous figure. Still, the warmth remained, settling deep within her soul. The ghost's presence felt like a shield, a blessing in the darkness. Before fading back into the night, her mother shared a final message, urging patience and courage. "The path ahead is hard, but your strength is greater than you know. Trust in the whispers of your wounds and in the power that grows within you. One day the village will listen." As the light dimmed and the hut returned to stillness, Adana lay awake, heart pounding with newfound hope. The rope that had once been a symbol of pain was now a beacon of truth, and her mother's ghost had become the silent guardian of her awakening. That night marked a turning point. No longer just a victim, Adana was becoming a voice for justice, a living testament to resilience and the power of legacy. The whispers in her wounds were no longer just echoes of suffering but the beginning of a story that would change everything. The village had always been a place of routine, its people moving through their days with a steady predictability that few dared to challenge. But as Adana walked through the narrow paths that wove between mud-walled huts and sun-baked fields, an unmistakable shift rippled through the air, an invisible current that stirred unease and wonder alike. Animals, who once paid little heed to the villagers, now acted in strange and unexpected ways around her. The chickens clucked nervously and scattered when she approached, but the cows, the same cows she had cared for as a child, paused their grazing to bow their heads in her presence. Their large eyes seemed to hold recognition, as if they sensed something more profound about her than mere human suffering. Even the village dogs, usually fierce and territorial, wagged their tails tentatively, their growls softened to low whines when she passed. These subtle signs did not go unnoticed. Whispered conversations bubbled up among the villagers like a slow-burning fire. Some dismissed it as superstition, calling her cursed or touched by spirits, while others, especially the elders, exchanged nervous glances as if recalling old stories best left unspoken. Children followed her at a distance, wide-eyed with a mixture of fear and fascination. As Adana moved through the marketplace and by the well, voices seemed to carry faint echoes, not from her but around her, as though the very air was alive with hidden messages. At first, the villagers thought they imagined it. Whispers just out of reach, unintelligible murmurs that disappeared when closely listened to. But soon more noticed. A woman sweeping her doorstep paused, her broom frozen mid-air, hearing her own name carried softly on the wind. A man hauling water to his home shivered as a ghostly phrase of accusation brushed past his ear. Adana herself felt the stirrings most intensely. The whispers on her back, those ancient, secretive murmurs, began to respond to the world around her. They shifted and swirled like living currents, resonating in tune with the hidden truths and lies woven into the village's fabric. When she passed by the man who had spread cruel rumors about her, her scars tingled fiercely, as if the rope's spirit recoiled from falsehood. The whispers grew louder when she encountered the harsh judgments cast by the elders, their eyes heavy with suspicion and control. At night, when the village slept, the whispers told her stories, old wounds from forgotten times, injustices long buried beneath the soil. They spoke of women silenced, children lost, and promises broken. With each tale, Adana's heart grew heavier but her resolve deepened. She realized her pain was no longer hers alone. It was a vessel for the village's buried sorrows and the unspoken hopes for change. The village's animals seemed to mirror this transformation. The cows that once bowed quietly now formed protective circles around her when she worked in the fields, shielding her from gossiping eyes and hostile stares. The chickens would nest near her, their soft clucks a lullaby against the night's fears. Even the wind seemed to carry a softer tone when it brushed her hair, whispering encouragement. Yet not all were comforted by this change. The village elders grew restless, their authority challenged by the unseen force that followed Adana. They whispered of curses and old magic, seeking ways to silence the girl whose wounds spoke louder than their decrees. Some villagers avoided her altogether, crossing themselves or clutching talismans for protection. But a few dared to approach, drawn by curiosity or a flicker of hope. They sought her out in the quiet moments between chores, asking questions about the whispers and the strange bond with the animals. Adana answered with gentle honesty, sharing what she could without revealing the full depth of her burden. She spoke of listening, to the past, to the earth, and to the hearts of those around her. In the midst of this growing tension, a young mother brought her child to Adana, placing the baby's tiny hand in hers and whispering, "If you can hear the whispers, can you help us? We are tired of living in fear." The child's innocent gaze sparked something fierce and protective within Adana, strengthening the unspoken promise she carried. The village was no longer the place of silent suffering it had been. The old wounds were waking, and with them the need for truth and healing. Adana's body and spirit had become a mirror reflecting the hidden cracks in their world, cracks that could no longer be ignored. Though fear lingered, so too did the first stirrings of courage. The whispers in her back, once a source of pain and confusion, had transformed into a chorus of awakening, ready to confront the lies and cruelty that had long held the village captive. And as the sun set each day, casting long shadows over the dusty paths, the villagers could no longer deny the change. They were living in the presence of something new, something powerful, and something that would reshape their future forever. The sun hung low over the village, casting a golden glow that mingled with an air of uneasy anticipation. The villagers gathered in the central square, murmuring softly, eyes darting toward the modest hut where Adana had been summoned to stand before the elders. The tension was thick, a mix of fear, curiosity, and simmering anger, for no one knew exactly what this day would bring, only that it marked a turning point. Adana's footsteps were steady as she approached the circle of elders seated on woven mats beneath the ancient baobab tree. Their faces were weathered, some stern, others veiled in suspicion. The rope's legacy had long cast a shadow over her family, but now it was clear that the pain etched into her back was something far more than personal torment. It was a vessel of truth. As the elders prepared to question her, Adana felt a familiar tingling crawl along her spine, the whispers from the ancient rope growing louder, more insistent. The scars on her back, once silent witnesses to cruelty, now pulsed with a strange power, a voice rising from the depths of her wounds. She stood before the elders, heart pounding but resolve unwavering. Then, in a voice that surprised everyone, her back began to speak, not in whispers but aloud, in a clear, commanding tone that echoed across the square. "The truth you hide will no longer be buried," it said. "The crime of betrayal stains this village, and its shadow falls darkest upon one among you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elders' faces paled, their eyes flicking nervously among themselves. Murmurs escalated to stunned silence as Adana's back continued to speak, recounting a secret long concealed, a crime committed by one of the village's most respected elders. The story unfolded with chilling clarity. The elder had abused his power, silencing dissenters and stealing from the communal granary to enrich himself. His actions had contributed to the suffering of families, including Adana's own, yet until now no one had dared confront the truth. The villagers' shock gave way to disbelief and fear. How could a young woman's wounds reveal such a betrayal? Was this some dark magic? Whispers of curses and spirits swirled once more, but beneath the fear, a flicker of hope kindled in some hearts. If her scars could speak truth, perhaps justice could be restored. Among the crowd, a group of women and elders exchanged cautious glances. They had long suspected corruption but lacked proof. Now, Adana's back had become an undeniable witness. Slowly, some stepped forward, pledging their support, their voices soft but firm. "We cannot ignore this," one elder said, breaking the silence. "Truth must be faced, no matter how painful." But not all agreed. The accused elder's supporters pushed back fiercely, accusing Adana of witchcraft, warning of chaos and discord. The village was divided, caught between the old ways of silence and the dawning need for justice. Adana stood tall amidst the turmoil, her pain transformed into power. The whispers from her wounds had become a voice for the silenced, exposing corruption and demanding change. Her courage inspired others to speak, breaking the chains of fear that had long bound the village. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the square, the elders reluctantly agreed to investigate the accusations. For the first time, the villagers glimpsed a future where truth could heal rather than destroy. Though fear lingered, the tide had begun to turn. Adana's back, once a symbol of suffering, had become a beacon of courage and justice. A living testament that even the deepest wounds could speak the loudest truths, and that no secret, no matter how well hidden, could remain buried forever. It began slowly, just a whisper in the night, then another in the morning breeze. At first, Adana thought the voices would fade, like memories dimming with time. But they only grew stronger. After the day her back revealed the truth in front of the elders, it was as though something ancient had been unlocked, a door flung wide, and now the voices of the forgotten surged through it like a flood. She could no longer sleep without hearing them. When her eyes closed, shadows gathered behind her lids, faces she didn't recognize, names she had never learned, stories half-spoken and unfinished. Children who had died without justice, mothers who had been blamed for the sins of others, men whose bodies were buried in secret. They came to her back, to the scars, to the rope that had once taken and now gave. They clung to her, each voice desperate to be heard. By the time the third night came, Adana hadn't slept a moment. She sat upright in her mat, eyes red, hands clenched around her knees, trying to will the whispers into silence. But they would not stop. They spoke in waves, soft murmurs one moment, loud moans the next. They chanted her name as if she were both their judge and their last chance. Some pleaded. Others cried. Some shouted in rage. When she walked through the village, people stared. Some bowed their heads, others turned away. They knew she was changing. The whispers were not always silent anymore. Sometimes when she passed, a villager would freeze as a voice from her back echoed faintly, exposing a secret or asking a question only the listener understood. People started fearing her again, not for what she might do but for what might be revealed. Adana felt the pressure in her chest rise each day. She could barely eat. Food tasted like ash. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold a calabash of water. The weight of the dead was not just spiritual, it was physical, emotional, and mental. They needed her, all of them, and their need became an ache in her bones. One evening, as she knelt by the river to wash her face, the voices overwhelmed her. Hundreds of them, layered upon one another, screamed, wept, begged. She clutched her head, crying out for them to stop. She fell forward, hands submerged in the river, shaking. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I am only one girl." But the river carried the voices too, echoing them back like a song of sorrow. Behind her, the cows that had once comforted her at the trough now gathered silently. They surrounded her as if sensing the collapse. One stepped forward and pressed its warm forehead against her shoulder. In that moment, a wave of silence fell over the voices, a pause like a held breath. Adana sobbed into the beast's flank, grateful for a moment of peace. She began to avoid people, isolating herself in the outer fields. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale, her back radiating heat from the constant activity of spirits within it. She walked with a heaviness that came not from her body, but from the lives she now carried within her. Stories swirled in her mind endlessly, stories of betrayal, of unjust deaths, of souls trapped in limbo because no one had ever listened. Children started leaving small gifts outside her hut, flowers, pebbles, food, believing she could carry messages to their dead mothers or grandfathers. One child cried and asked if her missing brother was with Adana's voices. The girl had no answer, only more weight pressing into her soul. She tried rituals. She tried silence. She tried prayer. Nothing dulled the constant chorus in her back. Even her mother's spirit, once a guide, had grown distant, perhaps lost among the many others now flooding through the rope's magic. One night, she saw her mother again in a dream. This time the ghost did not smile. Her eyes were weary. "You must not carry all of them," her mother said. "You are not a gate." "But they come to me," Adana answered. "They have no one else." "Then you must become what they need," her mother said. "Not a vessel. A passage." When Adana woke, she was crying. She knew then she couldn't keep them inside. She had to find a way to release the voices, to let their truths be known without letting them devour her. She would need to learn how to speak without becoming drowned, how to honor without becoming buried. But she didn't know how, not yet. Until then she endured. The villagers whispered of her growing frailty. They wondered if she was losing her mind. Some feared she would die. But still each morning she rose. Bruised, sleepless, her back burning with restless spirits, she rose. The dead trusted her. Now she had to learn how to live with them. He waited until the moon was swallowed by the clouds. Until the village was asleep and silence stretched across the land like a shroud. The stepfather stood in the clearing behind the compound, holding the rope with both hands, his knuckles white, his lips pressed into a line of grim determination. He had feared it for too long. Ever since that day when Adana's back had spoken, when her wounds began echoing truths, his world had started to tremble. He could not sleep. He heard whispers in the rafters, felt judgment in every glance from the villagers. And though no one had dared confront him openly, he knew they suspected. He saw it in their cautious stares. It was only a matter of time before Adana's back spoke his name, before it spilled the blood on his hands. He would not let that happen. The rope, old and frayed from decades of weather and punishment, still held weight in its fibers, memories, pain, injustice. It had hanged her mother, and now it lived again on Adana's skin, seething with voices that should have remained buried. He had tried beating her into silence. He had tried isolation. Nothing worked. So now he would end it the old way, by fire. He stacked dry wood into a pyre and set the rope in the center like a serpent awaiting execution. He struck the flint. Sparks leapt. The flames hissed to life, licking the edges of the rope with greedy tongues. But the rope did not burn. The fire danced around it. Smoke rose, the wood crackled, but the rope remained whole. Not untouched but transformed. The edges began to blacken, not with decay but with something richer, darker, pulsing. Ash swirled upward unnaturally, thick and slow, like ink in water. The rope did not scream, but something beneath it did, an echo that made the stepfather stumble backward, clutching his chest. The rope rose slightly, not lifted by hands but by something unseen. And as it hovered over the fire, the ashes gathered in the air. They whirled like a small storm, then drifted with purpose, toward Adana. She awoke with a gasp. The wind inside her hut trembled, though no doors had opened. The air turned warm and the silence shattered with a deep, resonating hum. Her back ignited, not with flames but with sensation, as though her skin was absorbing something ancient and raw. She clawed at her tunic, falling to her knees as the heat pressed deeper, past flesh and into spirit. And then, like snow melting into earth, the ashes seeped into her scars, each whisper now louder, fuller, filled with fire. The stepfather watched from the clearing as the rope, now reduced to strands of coal and shadow, crumbled completely. Yet somehow he knew it had not died. It had merely moved. By dawn he fled the village. Adana could barely rise from the floor. Her body trembled from the sheer force of the voices now inside her. No longer passive or weeping, they roared. They commanded. They didn't just want to be heard, they demanded justice. Her back, once a map of pain, now shimmered faintly with heat and symbols that flickered like embers. Her breath came in short gasps as she clung to the edge of her bed. The ashes had merged with the rope's legacy, and that legacy had merged with her blood. Outside, animals stirred. Dogs whined and hid under huts. Chickens refused to leave their coops. The cows, however, stood in silent attention outside her hut, their eyes glowing faintly in the morning mist. They knew. When she stepped out, the villagers stepped back. They saw it in her eyes, something had changed again. Her presence hummed with pressure, like the moment before thunder. As she passed, children fell quiet. Women clutched their charms. The elders avoided her gaze. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The voices had aligned. No longer scattered and frenzied, they spoke with direction. They whispered names. They spoke of wrongs. They urged her forward. She felt their pulse through her spine. Later that day, a woman approached her. She was old, bent by years, eyes hollowed by secrets she'd never dared tell. Her hands shook as she touched Adana's arm. "You carry them now, don't you?" she asked. Adana nodded. The woman wept, not from fear but from relief. "Tell my daughter I didn't leave her. Tell her I was taken." Adana touched the woman's hands, and in that moment, her back whispered, softly but clearly. The woman's daughter had been stolen in childhood, sold and lied about. The truth spilled like honey and poison. The woman sobbed and Adana let her. Word spread. Not of fire or magic, but of truth. That the rope's ashes had chosen a new home. That Adana's scars were no longer marks of punishment but pages of testimony. The cowherders bowed when she passed. Even the trees seemed to lean closer to hear what might come next. That night, alone in her hut, Adana looked into the fire. Not the fire of destruction but of clarity. She understood now, burning the rope hadn't ended anything. It had awakened everything. What the stepfather had feared most had come to pass. He had tried to silence her. Instead, he had given her the strength to roar. The ashes would never leave her body now. They were etched into every wound, every breath, every step she took. And through her, the forgotten would finally be remembered, not as whispers but as law. She woke to the sound of her own breath echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. The whispers had grown louder in the night, not as murmurs but as declarations, clear, urgent, alive. Where once they whispered gently through the grooves of her scarred back, now they bellowed when wrong came near. Not in words alone but in vibrations. Her bones thrummed when someone lied. Her skin prickled at buried crimes. The voices of the dead and silenced surged through her like a tide. Adana had become the vessel, and her body was no longer hers alone. At first, the village watched her from a distance. They did not understand what they were witnessing, whether to fear her or follow her. But the first reckoning came swiftly. A merchant from a neighboring settlement had arrived to trade millet, smiling and boasting of his clean dealings. As he approached Adana in the square, laughing and offering coins, her body stiffened. She turned slowly to face him. And then, in a voice deeper than her own, the scar on her back split open, not to bleed but to speak. You took 3 girls. You left them near the river to silence their screams. The words dropped like stones. The merchant's face drained of color. Villagers froze where they stood. The cows near the square bowed their heads in unison, a slow, haunting movement that everyone saw. The merchant tried to run. He didn't make it past the shrine tree before a group of women tackled him to the ground. They didn't need proof beyond her voice. They had seen her survive the rope. They had heard her name the unnameable. That night, a crowd gathered around Adana's hut, not with weapons or fire, but with offerings. Pieces of fabric, bread, tokens of lost loved ones, and most of all, stories. The kind people whispered only to themselves. The kind no one had believed before. Word spread like wind across the region. From neighboring hills, through the dried river paths, into the forests where women once vanished without trace, people came. Old men limped in with secrets to confess. Mothers arrived with daughters, pointing to their quiet stares and asking, "Does she carry pain?" Warriors came with pride in their eyes, asking her to judge if their hands were clean. She didn't speak to all. She didn't need to. Often, she sat still on her wooden stool beneath the rope shrine, once a tool of death, now hung reverently on a sacred pole in the center of the village. The rope had changed since the fire. Its fibers had twisted slightly, shimmering faintly in moonlight. It swayed gently even when the wind was still, as if listening, responding. When injustice approached, her back ignited. Her entire posture would stiffen. Her skin shimmered as if heat poured through it. The scars would pulse like veins filled with light, and then her back would speak. Sometimes in riddles, sometimes in clear language. Always in truth. A woman came who had lost her son to a hunting party. She was told he ran off. Her eyes were dull with disbelief, but she had never been able to prove anything. When she knelt before Adana, the villagers held their breath. The voice from Adana's back said, "He was struck in the throat by a man who owed his father a debt. They buried him near the fig tree with stones in his mouth." The villagers gasped. The next morning the search party found the bones, exactly where the voice had said. No one doubted her again. The elders, once the undisputed rulers of the village, began to lose grip. At first they tried to embrace her. They offered her gifts, invited her to sit with them in council. But Adana knew their motives. She saw how they squirmed when she passed. She heard the tremor in her scars whenever one of them lied. They had ruled with fear. Now the people feared something else, the truth. When the oldest elder, Chief Origo, publicly accused a widow of stealing grain, Adana felt the vibration in her spine before he finished the sentence. She turned to him in the marketplace and the back spoke with rage. "You poisoned your brother for his seat. You took her child to cover the deed. Do you want me to show them where he is buried?" Silence fell like ash. Origo collapsed on the spot. He died 2 nights later, not by poison or wound, but from terror. The whisper said the truth had weighed too heavily on his soul. One by one, the remaining elders resigned. Some fled. Others tried to redeem themselves by building new homes for orphans or surrendering land they had stolen. But power, once lost to truth, cannot be reclaimed with gifts. The villagers chose a new way of rule, not by bloodline or strength but by circle. Women, elders, youths, even former outcasts gathered weekly in what they now called the listening circle, sitting around the enshrined rope. If disputes arose, Adana would sit silently among them. Most times her presence alone was enough. People spoke truthfully in her shadow. And when they didn't, the rope would stir gently. Her scars would prickle. And the air would thicken with voices. It was not vengeance that drove her, but balance. She became a symbol, not of punishment but of reckoning. Children were taught her story from the age they could speak. They were shown the rope not as something to fear but as a reminder that injustice has a voice, and that silence cannot hold it forever. One day a child asked her, "Do the voices ever sleep?" She smiled, eyes weary but clear. "No," she said. "But they sing sometimes." In the evenings, as the wind brushed the grass and cows rested near the square, villagers claimed they could hear the faint sounds of song, from the rope, from her scars, from the earth itself. Songs of women who had died too soon. Of truths buried too deep. Of a girl who once bore the pain of the village and turned it into light. Adana no longer feared the weight of the voices. She had become more than a girl. She was a flame. A warning. A beacon. A daughter of silence who now roared louder than any storm. And the village would never forget it. She left at dawn. No one stopped her. The villagers had gathered silently in the square to watch her go. Men with heads bowed, women clutching children close, elders standing with trembling hands and faces lined with reverence. The rope shrine swayed gently behind them, catching the wind in a rhythm that felt like a farewell drumbeat. Adana carried no weapon, no staff, no bag. Only her body, scarred, sacred, and seething with the whispers of the forgotten. Her feet kissed the earth softly as she walked beyond the border tree, the same tree her mother had once been led past in chains. But Adana was not in chains. She walked free, though the burden on her back was heavier than any iron could be. Her scars pulsed beneath her skin, awake and alert. The whispers were no longer faint. They were full, clear, present. Every step she took stirred echoes from the soil, the wind, the trees. They had named her the living echo, the voice that carried truths long buried. The voice that could not be silenced. She passed through forests where men had once disappeared. Now the trees parted for her. The animals watched her without fear. Once she slept beneath an old fig tree and awoke to find birds perched quietly along her arms, listening to the hum of her back. In the first village she reached, she said nothing. She entered a market square and sat by the well, watching the flow of people. Her presence unsettled them at first. Her scars shimmered faintly beneath her tunic, and when children approached, they froze as if sensing something older than time itself. When a local chief strode through the crowd, barking orders and demanding tribute, Adana felt it, the tight pull along her spine, the spark beneath her skin. The voices whispered, "He starves his own blood. He buries coins beneath the clay and blames the widows." Adana stood. Without raising her voice, without pointing a finger, she turned her back to the chief. The scars rippled. "You steal food from your sister's house. You hide truth in the mouth of a dog. Shall I dig up what you've buried?" The square went silent. The chief backed away, his face pale. People gasped as children began repeating the words in sing-song tones, as if a nursery rhyme had been born from her wounds. That night, 3 women came to her hut. They brought bread, herbs, and silence. They didn't ask questions. They simply sat near her, shoulders touching in the dim light. And in their hearts, something long dormant stirred, belief. Adana left the next day. She never stayed in one place too long. She didn't need to. Her work was not to settle, it was to reveal, to cleanse, to awaken. In one town, a girl followed her for 3 days in silence before finally whispering, "They say my brother ran away. But I see him in my dreams. He's cold. He wants to come home." Adana placed her hand gently on the girl's chest. The voices stirred. He was taken by his uncle. Sold for cattle. Buried in a dry field where stones weep. The girl sobbed. And for the first time in years the villagers listened to her. In another village, a group of soldiers attempted to block her path. They had heard of her, heard that her back could speak, that she was undoing the power of corrupt men across the region. They demanded she leave. She knelt to the ground. Dust swirled around her, gathering like smoke. "You, the one who raised your spear, your mother weeps beneath your floor. You never gave her peace. You buried her with blame." The soldier screamed and ran. The others followed. None dared touch her. Soon word of the living echo reached the cities. Rulers spoke her name in council meetings, not with reverence but with fear. They hired spies to track her, shamans to block her power. Some claimed she was a spirit, a demon, a curse. Others declared her a prophet, a saint, a daughter of the gods. The truth was simpler. She was pain turned voice. She walked through villages where people had been voiceless for generations. She did not preach. She listened. Her presence alone stirred confessions from stone-faced men, comforted wailing mothers, and unearthed secrets that even time had tried to bury. Her back bore every truth she'd revealed, each scar a line in the growing tapestry of her legacy. When she passed, old women whispered, "There goes the one who speaks for our dead." And the dead listened too. They came to her in dreams, in flickers of memory, in the tremble of her muscles when she neared a lie. They did not haunt her. They guided her. Sometimes they sang. Other times they wept. And she wept with them. She arrived at one burned-out village and found only one man left. He sat among the ashes, blind, his hands coated in soot. When she asked him what happened, he only muttered, "They wanted to hide something. So they burned everyone." Adana walked through the rubble. The voices rose instantly. A child was buried in the third hut. A woman died trying to shield him. The chief ordered it. The guards did nothing. The rain cried for weeks. She wrote it in the dirt. She carved it into the scorched walls. When travelers came, they found the truth waiting, not in words of judgment but in her silence. People began to follow her. Not as worshippers but as witnesses. They walked behind her, village to village, carrying no flags or symbols, just ears open and hearts bared. They called themselves the listeners. Many were women. Some were children. A few were men who had lost everything but guilt. They helped her remember. They helped her hold the weight of stories too heavy to carry alone. In one large settlement, a king sent guards to arrest her. They entered the square where she sat quietly under a fig tree. But before they could reach her, they stopped. The air had changed. The birds were silent. The tree swayed though no wind blew. Adana's back began to glow faintly. She turned. "You have 33 bodies beneath your throne. Shall I name them?" The guards dropped their weapons and fled. That night, the king abdicated and fled into exile. She never struck a man. Never held a weapon. Her back did all the fighting. The story spread like wildfire. Not of violence or vengeance, but of revelation. In time, people began bringing her offerings, not of gold or jewels but names. Names of the missing. Names of the wronged. They carved them into wood and placed them in her path. She kept walking. No palace could contain her. No army could stop her. She was truth made flesh. Wounds turned witness. In the years that followed, the land began to change. Chiefs stepped down willingly. Markets opened to the poor. Widows were given seats of power. Justice circles were formed, with Adana's name spoken before each hearing, not as a law but as a reminder. Some whispered she was immortal, that she had become part of the earth. Others believed she was still walking further than anyone could track, revealing truths in villages yet untouched. No one knew where she would appear next. But wherever a lie was too loud or a wound too deep, the people would look to the wind and say, "The living echo will come." And sometimes on quiet nights, if you stood still enough, you could hear her back whispering, carving another truth into the world, one scar at a time.